An excerpt from Eternal Wanderings by Danielle Ackley-McPhail. There were screams in the night, and they were not Kara's. She came instantly alert and rose from her bunk. Not again. Was it more townies lashing out in fear and hate? Or something worse? Scrambling from her cubby, she nearly collided with Tony. That wasn't you. Kara shook her head, but Tony had already flung himself out of the wagon door, skipping the steps altogether as he hit the ground at a run, unconscious flickers of Mage energy trailing behind him. The door slammed behind her as Kara followed. On impulse, she had grabbed Quicksilver on her way out, slinging the violin over her shoulder by the case's strap. In the dark, shadowy figures hurried towards one of the wagons on the other side of the camp. The screams had ended, but the night was filled with shouts and calls of what Kara could only assume were instructions. She really needed to properly learn Romani. She slowed and hung back as she neared where everyone had clustered. These were not her people, after all. They would not welcome her intrusion. Lala wandered past. Even in the dark, Kara could tell her friend was pale and trembling. "What is it, Lala? What happened?" Lala stopped abruptly. Her eyes were unfocused, shocky, rolling almost. So much. Frowning, Kara reached out and drew her friend close. Lala's body went tense, rigid even. Kara looked around, hoping to find someone to explain. She spied Tony heading for them. His gaze flickered to the t-shirt and boxers she slept in. He scowled as he looked up again. When he drew close, Kara noticed his face was also ghostly white and his breath choppy. Her heart ached to see the haunted look return. Instinctively, she reached out to him. Tony waved her off and looked at her clothes again. "Go get decent before someone sees you." Kara glared at him. As far as she was concerned, she was decent. Besides, it wasn't as if she'd expected to come out in public. She bit back the urge to comment, though. She was among the Rom, and to them the sight of her legs was marmim, dirty. And as her husband, Tony would share her shame in their eyes. Annoyed, she went inside and pulled her skirt from earlier on over the boxers. "Thank you," Tony murmured as she came back out. "Now please, you and the lady, see if there's anything you can do." He pointed toward the wagon across the way, where the disturbance seemed to be localized. Kara stared at him, her brow furrowed, not sure Lala would be much help to herself at the moment, let alone anyone else. But then Kara realized Tony's gaze went to the violin slung across her back. Danu. He meant Danu. Or Quicksilver, anyway, for he couldn't know part of the goddess resided within, could he? Kara drew a sharp breath and hugged her friend tight. "I'll be back soon." Lala stood like a board without responding or reacting. Whatever had happened must have been bad. With a gentle squeeze, Kara passed her to Tony's care and hurried for the group standing beside the wagon. It was not difficult to work her way past the milling crowd. Many hung back, their expressions a moving tapestry of horror, sorrow, and confusion. Common to all was an air of outrage. Hands flickered like pale flames in the darkness, over and over, making signs against evil. Slowly, respectfully, Kara stepped past them and up to those by the wagon. "You! This is your fault!" a shrill voice called out from the crowd. "There's been nothing but bad luck since you joined us." Kara turned and scanned the faces. Most were stunned and uncertain, but the speaker stood out. Sevilla Monroe. Her dark hair and eyes made her blend with the night, but the malice in her gaze burned like a beacon. The woman had never warmed to Kara. She was a fellow fiddle player and had no kindness for anyone who outshone her, particularly one not of the Rom. It was an effort not to respond, but Kara managed. She turned back to the crowd gathered beside the wagon. One look at the clan leader's face, however, and Kara was ready to tear out Sevilla's raven curls. Marcos glared at Kara, his jaw flexing and his lips twitching back. Remembering their talk, it was very likely he was about to cast her out, egged on, no doubt, by Sevilla's claims. "Don't," Kara said. "I had nothing to do with this. I don't even know what this is." From the look on Marco's face, that might just be irrelevant at this point. "I've come to see if I can help," she continued, keeping her tone low and even. The clan leader stepped to the side and swept his hand toward the ground. "And how do you propose to help that?" Kara gasped, and her thoughts went a little frantic at the sight of the man on the ground at her feet. Robert Wyatt's. What in the world could have brought this giant down? His clothing gaped in long furrows from chest to groin, as did the flesh and muscle beneath. Blood glistened in the lamplight, and Kara caught a sharp, fetid odor that she suspected meant a bowel had been sliced. Was there something else? A hint of musk? Dear God, she hoped not. She hadn't thought beyond the Mage-born she. It hadn't even occurred to her that any among the Rom might be at risk. She swallowed back the bile surging up her throat. Robert and his sister Megan had shared a seat with her just this evening. They had laughed and groaned and hung on Siege's words together. This isn't Tir na Nog. Even those fairy-touched cannot help the dead. Marcos had a point. Where's Megan? Inside. Perhaps her you could help, one of the women said. Kara turned her gaze to the wagon. Another traditional Vardo, intricately carved and painted with runes and symbols of protection. Even to her normal vision, the symbols held a faint shimmer. Mage energy. Powerful mage energy. Kara's brow furrowed in confusion. Not Robert's or Megan's. She wondered who placed the protections. There was almost a she quality to the energy. They weren't inside then, she murmured. No, the old woman confirmed, though it had not been a question, and Kara had not particularly been talking to her. They'd been to tend a sick pony and were just returning. Kara looked at where the clan's ponies were tethered, then back to the woman. Has anyone checked to see if the animals are unharmed, or if anyone else has been attacked? Marcos answered instead, his voice rife with annoyance. Of course. No other has been harmed, man or beast. Kara looked towards the entrance of the wagon. Several brawny men stood guard, though she wasn't sure why. From within the Vardo, harsh curses and soulful cries mingled in the night, both sounding of one voice. The anguish drew her, even as some darker thread beneath it told her to flee. She ignored the impulse and nodded to the woman. But when she turned to head for the wagon, a hand reached out to halt her, all whipcord and leather, with knobby joints that had to ache. Best you help her from here if you can, the old woman said. Kara nodded. A mere wagon wall would make no difference. Either she could help or she could not. She barely noticed Lala come up beside her as she removed Quicksilver from her case and prepared to play. As if in response, the uproar grew more violent. Pain and fear and anguish radiated from the wagon. Kara felt all three as if they burrowed into her heart. Hard behind that, sharp jags of rage spiked through everything, growing stronger. Kara's eyes narrowed, and she swiftly raised her shields against outside emotion wrestling away her control. The Vardo shuddered and rocked as something slammed against the door from the inside. Her gaze jerked back to the wagon, while beside her the elder gripped her arm again and shook. "Play!" both she and Marcos ordered Kara at once. Before the imperious command faded, Kara ran bow across strings, her fingers already working up and down Quicksilver's neck. Her instructors at Juilliard would have stood in awe at the melody, goddess-guided and filled with the power of ancient magic, yet gentle and soothing as a mother's lullaby. Even the night creatures hushed. Kara focused her thoughts as Maggie had taught her, visualizing her magic wrapping around the one suffering, guiding it to soothe the fears, dull the pain, and bring peace to the troubled soul within. It took many long minutes of her playing for the Vardo to stop its shaking. The screams from inside gradually lost their shrill force, fading to sobs, then whimpers, and finally silence. Kara continued to play, the tune drifting into a healing air.